Many of us in our lives have experienced anger as a bad thing. We hear, don't get angry, nice girls don't get angry, you shouldn't be angry, and probably not helped by the fact that our forefathers in the church described anger as one of the 7 deadly sins. One of the things that we now understand about anger is, like joy and happiness and sadness, that it is a feeling. And feelings, as any therapist will tell you, are neither good nor bad. They simply are. They are part of our souls and selves. Anger, we know, is an emotion that comes in our lives when we have experienced something fearful, something hurtful, when we perceive ourselves threatened, when we've experienced a loss, and when we feel victimized. Those are just some of the reasons we might feel anger. And one of the things that I would invite us to do as Christians is not to label the emotion of anger as good or bad, to recognize it as an emotion, to recognize it as an experience of our very souls, and to recognize it as something that God has given us as being part of the human experience. When we become angry, when we have that expression of anger, what can be sinful is what we do with that feeling. When we experience anger, do we sit with the feeling? Do we become reflective about it? Or do we lash out at our partners, at our children, at our spouses, at our coworkers? And that lashing out, that behavior component of the anger, is certainly what can be sinful, but not always. And when we look at anger as an emotion of God, it invites us, I think, to see anger as a very visceral and powerful emotion. Carl Jung talked about anger as an emotion of fire, as an emotion of that great flame. It is the same image we use in the church of the Holy Spirit, that the disciples were gathered and the Holy Spirit of fire came upon them. And fire, we know, is a tremendously dangerous element in our world, but it is also the element of refining. It is the element that can clean a landscape and allow for new growth. And it is an element in many ways, like anger, that cannot be fully controlled. Maybe the best we ever do with our anger is we manage it, and we allow it to burn for the length of time it needs to burn. And then in that moment that we accept it, we can see anger do its beauty and its job, and its holy job of transforming, of creating a space for new growth, for new understanding, even a space where it maybe just cleans the wound. Many people become very angry after a loved one has died. And I don't suggest that anger makes that grief go away, but it might do some really wonderful jobs in our souls of clearing that wound so that it's no longer extremely painful and prevents us from going on in our lives. One of the things that we know about anger is that it often overlays the emotion of fear. We don't like to be scared as grown-ups. We think that's an emotion that we leave behind as children. So frequently I experience people who feel anger, who underneath that anger are scared or simply frightened. And so anger may give us a way to enter back into that small part of our souls that feels very fearful and insecure. We know that anger in Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza's stages of grief is that second stage of grief, that stage where we're so angry at the person perhaps who died and God for letting that person die. My experience in grief is that at that moment when we are overwhelmed by grief, that anger is the thing that will get us out of bed, that will get us to step back into life. And we may not be happy about it. We usually aren't. We are usually very resentful in that feeling, but anger is that fire that moves us into the world and can allow us in many ways to step forward into that new life that exists without this person in our lives the way that we have known them. Anger, I think, at its holiest understanding is an emotion of transformation. It is the emotion that is not permanent. Anger is not a place where we should stay. It is an emotion that pushes us forward. Usually we don't want to go there. Richard Rohr speaks of transformation and our emotions and our wounds as those things that we either transform them or we transmit them. And like anything else, our anger, or that emotion of anger, is either something that we allow to transform or we transmit it to people, and that is where we step in to the problematic parts of anger. That is where we step into the sin and the pain that anger can have in our lives. But for this part, for this conversation, I would like us to understand anger not as a negative and bad emotion, but as a gift from God that has been placed in our souls to be a useful part of our spiritual growth and a holy part of what it means to be a person of faith.